Hello, and welcome back to the Alignment series where we talk about everything goals, habits, systems, and identity. Today is day 9, and we are in phase 2, where the focus shifts from reflection to really understanding how achievement actually works in real life. This phase is built on the patterns observed across people who produced results. On day 8, we talked about the moment the drift ends. That's when a decision is finally made, when purpose becomes definite. Today, we're going to talk about what happens immediately after a decision is made, because clarity doesn't remove resistance, it actually exposes it. And to understand why, we need to go back to the moment when this work began, the moment when Napoleon Hill met Andrew Carnegie. See, after he met Andrew Carnegie, nothing about his life changed. Nothing. He didn't leave with any money, didn't leave with a list of contacts, didn't leave with guaranteed opportunities. Nothing was guaranteed. But something actually did change, and that thing was internal. See, Hill had committed to years of studying, of effort, of research with no guarantees. However, almost immediately after he made the decision, something appeared. Not opportunity, but resistance. Quiet questions, subtle doubts, and a subtle pull away from the decision he had made. See, later on, Hill admitted that the most dangerous part of his journey wasn't before he made the decision, but right after. That's the moment when most of us lose momentum and start drifting away from the decision we had just made. That moment when opposing forces try to undo the clarity of our purpose, not as obvious fears, but as reasoning that feels trustworthy. Questions that seem like wisdom, perspectives that feel safe. And if we don't understand this pattern, we might retreat without realizing it. See, fear never shows up as fear. That's what we talked about last week. That fear will never appear as fear itself. It'll show up as overthinking, as procrastination, as self-doubt, as pessimism. It'll show up in different ways. And Napoleon Hill understood that. In studying high achievers, Napoleon Hill identified something critical to achieving our goals. Unlike everybody else, high achievers feel fear, they see fear, they experience it, but it doesn't stop them. It doesn't delay them. They actually see it as a sign that they're moving in the right direction. See, they receive fear and then they do something about it. Instead of letting fear do something about their decision. So instead of delaying them, fear actually moves as a factor for acceleration. It's evidence that you're moving towards a certain direction. So last week we talked about fear as overthinking, procrastination, pessimism, self-doubt. Napoleon Hill went a level deeper, and he actually defined 7 fears that we all experience that tries to undermine our purpose. The first fear is the fear of poverty. That is a fear that delays our decision making and frames hesitation as responsibility. So we think that hesitating and delaying and thinking things through is actually a way to protect ourselves from the risk of poverty. It keeps us preparing instead of committing because we have an unhealthy perception of risk. Fear number 2 is the fear of criticism. That's us lowering our standards because we don't want to stand out. That is us adapting our behavior and changing our reactions, our personality, our character to fit societal approval. So it encourages us to edit our ambitions, to shrink so that we're able to fit the norm. Fear number 3 is the fear of ill death. That is the exaggeration of risk. The fourth fear is the fear of loss of love. This is the fear that I think each of us can actually admit that we've experienced that fear. It's the fear of losing the acceptance and the affection of a loved one. It's us compromising on our behaviors, on our decisions, on our standards, on the things that we value, to be able to keep on getting the acceptance from other people. It's basically misaligning ourselves with what we deem important so we can have other people's acceptance. And I think we've all been guilty of that. Unfortunately, we're human. So the fifth fear is the fear of old age. That's the fear that makes us think that we have to make decisions because we're either too young or too old. That's us deciding to settle for things because we feel like there's risk associated to the time we have left. And so we settle for things that don't align with who we are or what we want for ourselves because we have a fear of getting old or being too young. And that fear causes us to act in urgency without really making any progress because we're not moving in alignment with who we really are and what we really want. It's us just settling. It's really just settling. Just settling for whatever comes your way because you don't find yourself worthy of what it is you actually want and what is aligned with who you are. The sixth fear is the fear of death. The fear of death, the fear of going to see your maker before you feel ready to do it. That is us overestimating what could go wrong and underestimating our ability to recover. It's actually trading in boldness for recklessness and thinking that being cautious is the best decision. And so what that does is it keeps us from taking any risk. It keeps us from doing things that we're meant to do because, again, we have an unhealthy perception of the risk associated to the decision we would make. Now, the last fear is the fear of loss of freedom. This is the fear that keeps us from committing to one thing. It's the fear associated with the lack of commitment. That's the fear that makes us think that flexibility and having multiple options open is better than committing to one thing and seeing progress with that thing only. So it's basically choosing flexibility and the opportunity in every option we keep open rather than the progress that could be made by committing to one thing. This makes me think about what Miles Monroe said that we talked about last week, which is one of the silent killers of success, and that is broken focus. Broken focus. I think that fear would probably be associated to broken focus because having multiple options open, no matter how we see it, it breaks our focus. If we only commit to one thing, we're able to focus on that thing and see it through. But when we have multiple options open, that actually makes us spread our energy across multiple avenues, and then we get exhausted. So I would say that that fear is most likely linked to the silent killer of broken focus. It gives me something to think about. So now, what do these fears all have in common? What they have in common is that they operate in silence. They operate quietly. They quietly send instructions to our subconscious mind that dictate our behavior. And as we studied yesterday, the subconscious mind does not argue with us. Whatever we feed it is what it takes. They don't warn you that they're coming. They don't show up as fear. So now, being a Christian, I'm always going to take it back to the Bible. As I was studying this and preparing for this video, I kept thinking about 2 Peter 2:19. And it says a lot of things, but the last sentence in that verse says, people are slaves to whatever has mastered them. And when I think about fear, it makes me realize that the only thing that fear can do is what we allow it to do. So fear means nothing if it has no authority. Fear means nothing if we're not enslaved by it and subject to it. And this is why Napoleon Hill emphasized the fact that to deal with fear, you don't attack it. You don't increase your intensity. You don't try to undermine fear. What you do is you build self-discipline, because he noticed a pattern. He noticed and realized that high achievers had the highest ability to govern themselves. The people who are able to achieve their goals and reach their highest potential are the ones that are able to govern themselves. And he gave us 4 areas where self-governance, well, he calls it self-mastery. And Brian Tracy talks about that too. But he identified 4 areas where self-mastery is important if we want to see achievement. And those areas are: 1, our thoughts; 2nd, our emotions; 3rd, our time; and 4th, our habits. I keep going back to the Bible because as I'm doing this, I realize that the Bible is just so true and timeless. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. Think it, that's your thoughts. Think it, that's our thoughts. And the Bible also says that we are to hold captive every thought and subject it to truth, subject it to the Word of God. What that means is that it almost seems like we have to argue with our thoughts. We have to see our thoughts as an entity that we have the power and authority to argue with. And we need to win that argument. Otherwise, that fear is going to win the argument and take space and take room. It's almost like we need to take our thoughts into the courtroom and have a debate with it so we can defeat it. So fear is nothing if it doesn't have authority. Fear means nothing if it doesn't drive our behavior. Fear means nothing if it has no authority. And how do you remove the authority from fear? By self-discipline, self-mastery, mastering our thoughts. A thought comes to you, you debate. You ask that thought, where is it coming from? Why are you thinking that? what is causing you to have this belief? What is the belief that's hidden behind that thought? That's what this tells me. This is what self-mastery looks like to me. This is what mastery of thoughts looks like to me. The ability to take your thoughts and to question them, to arrest them. Basically, yeah, to arrest them, to arrest your thoughts and keep them from making progress and keep them from moving forward, and decipher what they entail and what they're made of and what's causing them to come to you before they're allowed to move forward. That's what I see self-mastery as. That's what I see mastery of thoughts as. It's basically saying that fear does not finish the sentence for you. So when fear comes to us with a what if, we're able to respond with a why not. When fear comes and says, why now, we're able to say, why not now? When fear comes and says, you shouldn't, we're able to answer, why shouldn't I? So it's a debate. It's a questioning that we're able to go and question our fears. So that's what I see as self-mastery of thoughts. So that's the first area. The second area is the mastery of our emotions. When I was watching the video where Napoleon Hill explained the story behind these concepts, as he was explaining the concepts, he was giving stories. And he talked about the story of a man who was being yelled at by another man. I don't know if it was his boss or his manager, I don't know. But that man was being yelled at, and he was being told very negative things, and he was being cussed at. And so Napoleon Hill watched the situation, and he observed how each man responded. And he was explaining that the man who was being yelled at was actually very calm. He didn't say a thing. And the other man was yelling and shouting and doing all of these crazy things. But the man who was being yelled at was quiet the whole time, as if he didn't even hear a thing. And then he explains that when the situation happened and they finished talking and the other man was done yelling, the man who was being yelled at came to Napoleon Hill and told him, and he was laughing. And he was like, well, he had a lot to say, and he just left. So Napoleon Hill uses that story to remind us the importance of self-governance, the ability to govern our emotions, the ability to feel a thing and to decide that we're not going to react based on what we feel. We're going to react based on what we know, and we're going to react with self-control. Again, the Bible talks about self-control. It is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Self-control. And Napoleon Hill calls it self-governance, self-mastery. So mastery of emotions. Mastery of emotions. The ability to feel anger, sadness, fear, all of these emotions, and decide that despite how you feel, you will act on what you know. You will act on what is best. You will make a decision based on what you know to be the right thing to do at this time. The next thing Napoleon Hill considers to be important, the next area where he wants to see self-mastery if you want to be a high achiever, is the mastery of our time. So that is basically having priorities and not letting urgency replace our priorities. That is deciding in advance what is important. We talked about that with standards last week. But in terms of mastery of time, it's deciding, what am I going to do with my time? And for me to know what I'm going to do with my time, I need to know what my purpose is. I need to know where I'm going, and I need to know what it's going to take. I need to know what my standards are, what's important to me, what is the lowest level of quality that I'm allowing to live my life by, and how does that fit into the time that I have. Time is the most limited resource that we have as human beings. We cannot waste it. We cannot get it back. We have no control over it. The only control we have is what we do with the time that we're given. And our days are numbered, as the Bible says. Once again, the Bible. Our days are numbered. Our days are numbered. And we don't know how many days we actually have on earth. So we cannot let the fear of old age, the fear of death, the fear of ill health take away from what we do with our time. Because our time is limited. It is a limited resource. So mastery of time is the third area that Napoleon Hill highlights, where we need to be masters and govern those areas if we want to be high achievers. The last area is mastery of habits. As you know, this series is about habits. It's about what we're going to do to achieve goals that move us towards the direction we want to move towards and help us become who we've always dreamed of becoming, and making the most of the time that we have this year and using it to fulfill the purposes that we know to be ours. So mastery of habits does that, and that's simply dictating your behavior so that it operates in favor of your purpose. so that it moves you in the direction of your purpose. So your purpose is this way, and your behavior moves you towards that direction instead of the opposite or the different way. And mastery of habits also involves what you do when you don't feel like it, when you don't want to do it, when motivation fades, when intention is limited. What do? That's mastery of habits. Do you keep your habits? Do you keep your routines? Because you know and believe in what you want to become so much, your purpose is so definite that you actually continue to do what you're supposed to do. You have the discipline it takes because you know that that's what you need to do. No matter how you feel, no matter if you're sad, no matter if you just broke up, no matter if you ain't got no money in your account, no matter if you just got yelled at, what do? What do you do in these situations? That's mastery of habits. Being master over your habits is a critical skill that Napoleon Hill identified. So we've identified those 4 areas, and we're going to stop here. And I want to leave you with this. You need to ask yourself certain questions to know where you stand, how each of these 7 fears have operated in your life. Take last year and just sit down and think about, how has fear presented itself to me? Aside from overthinking, procrastination, self-doubt, pessimism, and all these things, how has fear shown itself to you? How has it presented itself? Was it the fear of old age, thinking that you couldn't do something because you feel like you're too old or too young to do it? Was it the fear of criticism, trying to shrink and fit societal norms because you don't want to stand out and you don't want to be criticized for having different ambitions, different personalities, different ways of seeing things? Was it the fear of death that kept you from doing what's on your bucket list? What was it? Whatever that fear is, identify it. Once you've identified it, identify how it's had authority over your decisions, how it's had authority and ability and the ability to govern your thoughts, govern your actions, govern your habits and your time. Once you know that, look at the 4 areas where you need to be master over your life. Look at the 4 areas where you need to be the one governing and not fear, and identify how you can govern those areas more. So ask yourself, where has fear sounded more like wisdom? Where has fear kept me from making decisions? Where have my reactions and my emotions driven my relationships? How have my emotions and reactions changed my decision making? In what ways have I been too angry or too emotional or too sad to do something I was supposed to do? When have my emotions held me back from my purpose? These are questions we need to sit with. And then identify, how can I improve my inner governance? How can I work on the inner me before I project it to the world? And then think about what environments have been in favor of you operating in fear instead of operating in clarity and wisdom and alignment here. What environments have caused you to shrink and become different than who you know that you are? What factors, what environments, what situations, what relationships have caused you to become misaligned with your true identity, your purpose, and the direction that you're supposed to be going in? These are things that we need to sit with and think about. Okay, I am done for today. I will see you for day 10, where we will talk about the last 4 principles from the science of achievement.